Good afternoon and good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Krista Hughes and I'm pleased to welcome you today to this media conference about Project Jura, cross-border settlement using wholesale central bank currencies. The report was produced by the BIS Innovation Hub, the Swiss National Bank, the Banque de France and private sector partners. With me today in Basel is Benoit Curé, head of the BIS Innovation Hub. Sylvie Goulard, Deputy Governor of the Bank of France, is connected from Paris, and Andrea Mechler, member of the Governing Board of the Swiss National Bank from Zurich, fitting the cross-border nature of the project. They will give brief introductory remarks before we turn to question and answer session. Morten Beck, head of the Innovation Hub Swiss Centre, and Thomas Moser, alternate member of the Governing Board of the SNB, are also available to take questions. Please restrict your questions to the contents of the report. Before we begin, I would like to reiterate that comments made at this media conference are on the record, but under strict embargo until 5 p.m. Basel time today. The media conference is being recorded and will be published later on the BIS website. We'll now start with the introductory remarks. Benoit, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Krista. Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome. It's a pleasure to have Andrea, Sylvie and their colleagues from the Swiss National Bank and the Banque de France, even though virtually, in this press briefing. We're here today to present the conclusion of Project Jura. It is appropriately named after the mountain range straddling the French-Swiss border, since it is a wholesale Cbdc experiment across the two countries. It explores the settlement of tokenized assets and foreign exchange trades between French and Swiss financial institutions. Our main conclusion is that wholesale CbdC, so central bank digital currency, can settle such transactions both safely and efficiently. This may help addressing some of the deficiencies the G20 has identified in its cross-border payments work. The BIS Innovation Hub is involved in several cross-border CbdC experiments in cooperation with 10 central banks around the world. Jura focuses on transactions settling two assets or currencies against each other. The project's unique feature is that it was conducted in an almost real-life setting, including real value transfer and full compliance with the regulatory requirements of both France and Switzerland. Jura also put an emphasis on the governance for cross-border CbdC arrangements. It outlines a solution which could allow central banks to issue multiple CbdCs on a single platform and to regulated non-resident financial institutions. Project Jura was not only important for the insights it provided, but also for how it was conducted. The private sector consortium won a public call for applications. The two participating central banks, Swiss National Bank and Banque de France, host and will co-host, respectively, BIS Innovation Hub centers. The Swiss Center opened in October 2019. The Eurosystem Center will open in 2022 with offices in Paris and in Frankfurt. This close cooperation between several hub centers, different central banks, and the private sector is a model we want to emulate in the future. I would like to thank the Banque de France, the Swiss National Bank, and the Private Sector Consortium for the excellent work and cooperation in Project Jura.
Thanks, Benoit. And now we go to Paris. Sylvie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Benoit already stressed all the conclusions we draw together. I just wanted to make a point. You said, Benoit, it was quite real life. Maybe the press conference is the only thing that it is not so close to real life, but we are used to make virtual events. No, we are happy today because we are in a phase where we are very humble. We are trying to develop new tools and we need to test them. And the idea of this Franco-Swiss BIS cooperation was to test some of the main features of a project that could be cross-border and cross-currency. Of course, the Banque de France is part of the Eurosystem. So when we are doing all this, I want to underline this, it is to contribute to the ongoing reflections at the Eurosystem level. But we appreciate it very much to have this opportunity with Switzerland to test the cross-border, cross-currency. It was said it is on foreign exchange, transactions in euro and Swiss franc. It is wholesale. In the public, many people talk more about the retail CBDCs, but we all know that for banks and for some businesses, it will be important as well to make sure that there is access to wholesale CBDC. We included several partners in this work from the private sector as we try to issue, transfer and redeem tokenized euro-denominated French commercial paper between France and Switzerland. And all these partners involved give us also the opportunity to check all the legal aspects and the technical as well. And my very last point is that the technology we use, but I know that elsewhere in the world, maybe Benoit can explain this better later, we use a distributed ledger technology in this case. So innovation, openness in the cross-border dimension, contribution to the Eurosystem progresses, and of course we will be happy to see what we can do in the future. It's not the end of the road at all. So I give the floor to Andrea, and I want to thank Benoit and Andrea for the really excellent cooperation we had during all these months.
Thanks, Andrea. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Sylvie and Benoit. I can echo at this point also the thank you for the excellent collaboration. This is an exciting project. Let me also welcome and thank the media representative for joining us here today. Today, the settlement of cross-border securities transactions, foreign exchange transaction, or simple payments is generally slower, more expensive, more complex, and can involve higher risk than domestic settlements. Efficient and robust cross-border settlement arrangements are key in today's globalized world. This is particularly true for Switzerland as a small, open economy. Project Jura explores a new approach to cross-border settlement. Distributed ledger technology and tokenization are successfully leveraged to map out how safe and efficient international settlement between financial institutions could look like. We are conducting experiments with the distributed ledger technology as it has the potential to change the functioning of financial markets. To fulfill their mandate, it is essential for central banks to stay on top of technological innovation, to be able to preserve the safety and reliability of financial system going forward. The SNB very much welcomed the opportunity to team up with the Banque de France, the BIS Innovation Hub, and a group of private sector firms in this project. We would like to thank all of our partners for the excellent collaboration. For the SNB, Project Jura continues the work on wholesale CBDC, initiated with the first phase of Project Helvetia in 2020. Beginning of next year, the results of the second phase of Project Helvetia will follow. Several questions remain, and Project Jura pointed to some of them. More work needs to be done. The SNB is looking forward to continue its engagement in collaboration with the BIS Innovation Hub and other partners. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Great, thank you all for the introductions. And now we turn to questions. So to ask a question, please use the raise your hand function in WebEx, and we will call on you to unmute your line, or you can type your question into the chat as a message to all panelists. If you're dialing in over the phone, you can email your question to press@bis.org. And just to reiterate for anybody who may have joined late, the comments at this media briefing are on the record, but under embargo until 5 p.m. Central European Time today. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand in WebEx or type your question into the chat. So I see a question from Daniel Hinge from Central Banking. He asks, How important is DLT to the system? Does it have advantages over a centralized system? So, Benoit, would you like to take that first?
Sure. I'm happy to step in. So this project is not about comparing a DLT-based solution with a non-DLT-based solution. This is done globally by the central banking community. There are some CBDC projects are DLT-based, some are not DLT-based, and there are lessons to be learned from that. But this particular project is on a DLT, and it's about extracting the best from the capabilities of the DLT architecture to build a CBDC architecture that suits the need of central banks. And let me illustrate in two ways. First is about governance. We're talking of a multiple CBDC platform, so it's essential that each central bank keeps control over the CBDC it's issuing for sovereignty reasons and ultimately for monetary policy reasons. And here we're able to build on the capabilities of this particular DLT solution by providing each central bank with notary nodes, which allows them to keep control over their CBDC, and with a dual notary capability, which allows to exchange CBDCs against one another in a way that is controlled. So we're really extracting the best from this DLT structure to allow for multiple CBDC in a way that that protects the sovereignty of each central bank of issue. And another example, it's about the asset side of this project. This is one of the key features of this project is that it's not only about exchanging cash, it's also exchanging an asset, a digital asset against cash. And so there is, in technical terms, there is a DVP side to the project, delivery versus payment. And here also we're able to study in depth how this DVP leg of the transaction can be executed on a DLT. So it's really about having a deep dive into DLT capabilities to see how much they can serve central bank needs.
Thanks, Benoit. Anything to add from Sylvie or Andrea?
Okay, for me, Benoit was very clear.
So the next question is from Ian Hall from Global Government FinTech, and he wants to follow up on the last comment from Andrea that several questions remain. So he asks, which are the outstanding questions, and wholesale CBDCs good to go? So Andrea, perhaps I'll give that one to you first.
Sure, let me start. This is clearly, I could talk a long time because we are still at the beginning. We're not only in an exploratory stage of the work, but there's still many questions. So let me give a few of them. So first, what is clear is you always have to remember what we're doing is very clearly based on the design we've chosen. So what has the project Jura done? It's very clearly, there's a design on the single platform. There's some really interesting mechanisms that were introduced. Benoit mentioned them. There's the dual notary signature system that allows both central banks to really be in charge of their respective wholesale CBDC and yet be on the same platform that is managed by a third party. Broader question are, I mean, the big picture questions are, and it's a question that came also in the first question, is how scalable is it? How many transactions are going to be on that platform, and what makes it really efficient? For that, there's also the question, how well do these new platforms, digital platforms, really connect to the existing system? How does that work? Because ultimately the financial system for a long way to go is going to have these both systems. And I think there is a lot of questions still. It's about how do the platform itself and how do the banks integrate that atomic settlement that is being done on the platform all the way onto the balance sheet. So there are clearly many questions left on that area. There's the whole question, how can the financial system in general move basically from a current world, which is what I called simplistically a T+2 world, How can it move into a more and more a T+0 world, an instantaneous world, a world that is based on DLT? So those are really very important questions. Ultimately, the key one is interoperability. How do these systems among different DLT systems work? So here we looked at two different currencies. They were working on the single platform. But as you can see, there's a whole area of questions that we could line up that need to be looked into. Thomas, is there any particular do you want to add?
I think just to stress, as you said, and Benoit, that there are not only technical questions, there are also governance questions. Benoit addressed some that are addressed in this project, and legal questions as well, and then, of course, policy questions. So it's not just about the technical part.
If I may just add one word, Andrea described very well where we are. Just from the Eurozone perspective, I just want to stress that we are in a phase where we are studying the principle of having a Euro Cbdc. I cannot prejudge what is going to be decided. And if it is decided one day, then of course we will have to choose between the different experiments we did. And I'm sure that this one will be one of the very positive, but we will have to choose all together in the Euro area which kind of technology we prefer, how we organize it legally, etc. I just wanted to make this footnote to say that we are glad that it worked, but we still have a lot to do as well in exchanging with our partners within the Euro area to make sure that then we have a common view of what is feasible. And once again, this is wholesale Cbdc, and there are also reflections on the retail side.
Thank you. The next question is from John Revel from Reuters, and he asks, when did the experiment run from and to, and what was the total cash value of the transactions that took place during the trial? Secondly, what does the success of this project mean, and what happens next? What does it mean for the rollout of digital currencies in Europe? So, Benoit, would you like to take that first?
Yeah, thank you very much. So the total cash value was 200,000 euros. That's the value of the commercial paper that was being issued and then redeemed. For the exact where does the money run from and to whom does it run? Let me give the floor to Morten to go into more detail on the money flows. And of course, we are not going to answer the last question on what does it mean for the rollout of the digital euro. Certainly, Sylvie will be best placed to answer.
Yeah, let me just say that the experiment took place over 3 days in November, from the 15th to the 17th. And as Benoit mentioned, the first transaction was issuance of the commercial paper against the Wholesale Euro Cbdc. And then on the next day, there were also a transfer of the commercial paper in between the two Swiss banks. And then finally, on the third day, the commercial paper was redeemed again. And then also there were these foreign exchange transactions to accompany each of the transactions that I laid out. So if you wanted the total value, you would kind of have to add all those up. But I think the 2,000 euro is really the number to focus on.
Andrea or Sylvie, would you like to come in here?
No, maybe one word on the Eurozone. I repeat, it's an easy question. It's an easy answer, as we have not decided yet. As you perfectly know, there is a task force, a high-level task force in the Euro system, and several experiments are conducted in France, but also elsewhere. And then at the end, we will look at what functions best. And I cannot prejudge the decision of the Governing Council. And once again, it's not to hide something. We are really convinced that we need to dig deeper and to see what is efficient, safe, and brings an added value for the financial sector and for the transactions. Thank you.
Say a few words about the SNB. The SNB has no plans to issue a wholesale Cbdc or Cbdc of any sort at this time. It is an important experiment. The results have been found very valuable in our understanding, but they remain exploratory in nature. And so whatever the results are, they should not be interpreted as an indication that the SNB plans to issue a wholesale CBDC. But just like Sylvie has said, the insights that we have gained from going that additional steps have been tremendous, but there are many questions, both technological nature and, as was said, also very important policy questions that remain to be better understood.
Benoit?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's really good that that John is asking for numbers and also for more details about, where does the money run from and where does it run to, because what we're doing here is providing a concrete use case for wholesale CBDC. Too often the discussion has been very abstract about CBDC, and here we really illustrate a very, very concrete use case, which is about a cross-border securities transfer that happens thousands of times every day. If, of course, you can do it without a CBDC, you can do it today, but if you would do it without a CBDC, you would need to rely on, presumably, on correspondent banks on both sides to transfer the money, the cash, and access the RTGS systems on both sides, and also to rely on some bridge between two custodians, two CSDs. And that's a long chain of intermediaries, which presumably adds to the cost and to the length of the process. So here we are taking a real-life use case and showing how it can be made much streamlined, shorter, and faster using wholesale CBDC.
Thank you. The next question is from Natalie Olof-Orr. She asks, wholesale CBDC is quite an abstract concept for many people. Could you give us some examples of what wholesale CBDC could be used for? The report mentions SWIFT transactions, but could you give us some further details? Benoit?
Well, I think I just answered the question, actually. So this project is a concrete use case of wholesale CBDC, and it's about settling assets which are tokenized and exchanged on-chain on a DLT. That's a very concrete use case for CBDC, and together with our previous project, Helvetia, we've shown that we are showing now that using wholesale CBDC can streamline the process, integrate the operations along the life cycle of the asset and make everything simpler on a single platform. There are other use cases for wholesale CBDC, and particularly in the cross-border space. The G20 has given central banks and other institutions a mandate to look into ways to make cross-border payments cheaper and faster, and wholesale CBDC is one way to do it. And in the BIS Innovation Hub, we have other projects involving multiple CBDC without the digital asset side of the discussion. So it's only about cash transfers. But in all cases, the ultimate ambition is to make cross-border transfers cheaper and faster, which would have benefit for the financial system, but also for financial inclusion more broadly.
Anything to add, Sylvie?
Maybe one word. It's not retail, so it's not for ordinary citizens. Wholesale is the type of pipelines we have between the banks and financial institutions. So it's completely different from a possible access one day if the decision is taken for Benoit, myself in the Eurozone, or Andrea and Thomas in Switzerland to have an account or access to new payment systems. So wholesale is something we look at because, of course, if you reduce the costs for large transactions and you make them smoother between banks and financial institutions, you contribute to the stability of the financial system and you provide new services. But once again, for large institutions, banks, not for private persons or households.
Can I maybe, because I think this is a really valid question, is what is wholesale CBDC? What we're really trying to do is there a need to replicate what is today central bank money in electronic form in a digital form if such platforms are going to exist and be relevant? What is electronic central bank money? Sight deposits, as the deposits that banks hold at the central bank is basically central bank money, but they do it in what I will call electronic form. And nowadays, all large interbank payments, domestic and on the domestic side, have to go, are using central bank money, have to be done in central bank money and go through what is called the RTGS system, real-time gross settlement system. In Europe, it's the target 2. In Switzerland, it's the SIC payment. And basically, that's a system that's worked really beautifully for 30 years, and that's been a major importance of using central bank money. And the international community continues to say all systemically important transaction flows of transaction should, wherever possibly, be made using central bank money. And if you have more and more of these DLT, distributed ledger-based type infrastructure that are going to emerge and become of systemic importance, then it is very important for central banks to think at what point and in what form should there be also a digital form of central bank money.
Thank you. We have a question from Alain Guimol from Lacroix for Benoit. He asks, what will be the next step for the BIS Innovation Hub in experimenting with this kind of technology, and when do you plan those other experiments?
So CBDC is an essential part of the work program of the BIS Innovation Hub. I think I can fairly say that it's the most important part, at least in terms of the number of projects. We have the Jura project, which we're discussing today. We have 2 multiple CBDC platforms in Asia, the M-Bridge in Hong Kong and Project Dunbar in Singapore, and each of them is in cooperation with 4 regional central banks, and also looking into the potential for settling transaction with CBDC on a single platform. We have a retail CBDC project, Project Our Room in Hong Kong, which is well advanced already. And we also have a project looking into liquidity management on a CBDC platform, also in the Swiss center, called Project Titus. So you see that we're looking into the CBDC discussion through different angles. The BIS doesn't have a mandate to produce a CBDC. That is essentially national. It depends on legal frameworks, national legal frameworks, national financial systems, and the BIS has no authority and no legitimacy to do that. That has to be decided by central banks together with national authorities in each and every place. And it will be done in different ways. But what we can do is to look into particular problem statements that all central banks are asking themselves and provide answers to feed into the discussion and to accelerate the process, to help central banks move faster. We've opened 2 new centers recently in London and in Stockholm, and in these 2 centers we'll also look into some focused aspects of CBDC to inform the discussion. And hopefully also in the Eurosystem Center when it opens in early 2022.
Thank you. And just a reminder that if you wish to ask a question, you can also raise your hand. The raise your hand icon is next to your name in WebEx. So we do have a few more questions in the chat in the meantime. John Revel from Reuters has a follow-up question. He asks, on what grounds is this project judged a success? And does Europe risk being left behind on the rollout of digital currencies compared to China, for example? Benoit, would you like to take that first?
So on the, I guess the second one is for Sylvie and Andrea. But what I would say taking a global perspective on the rollout of CBDCs, is that different jurisdictions are coming from different places. They have different payment systems. They have different approaches to some of the key choices that have to be made when it comes to CBDC, including privacy or the role of banks in distributing CBDCs and so on. So all solutions will be different. Some countries have started earlier. So as you know, the Bahamas already have a CBDC. Some other developing economies have already started to roll out CBDC. but it's happening in different ways in different places. What's really important here is that the direction is the same and that there is cooperation. And that's really where the value added of the BIS is, to be a convener, bringing together central banks to provide common answers to the key questions, the key trade-offs that arise when doing CBDC, because we want the financial system to work as a system. We don't want CBDC to create fragmentation in the system, and that's really what the BIS will focus on. To the first question, on what grounds was this judge a success? Well, we wanted to show that we could settle a digital asset and then transfer the proceeds to a different jurisdiction in a real-life environment, abiding by local laws and using the local RTGS systems, and in a way that where central banks can keep full control of issuance of digital currency, and we've shown that it's possible. And you will. I would encourage all of you to look at the video, which we are posting on our website, which goes into much more detail on how this works, and you will see that it's not so complex. The video makes it quite clear how you can do that.
Yes, and the two videos explaining the process will be published on the website, the BIS website, at 5 o'clock when the embargo lifts. Sylvie or Andrea, anything to add?
Well, no, Benoit described well the fact that we wanted to transfer money from one country to another and the other way around, and we managed, and we did it in the legal framework we wanted to respect. So this is for us, this was the achievement. And once again, it's at a small scale, but we are confident that it can work. Further, on lagging behind in technological terms, one always has to be very careful because technology is a moving environment, but what we are trying to do is exactly to make sure that we master some new technologies, that we make the experiments, and the work launched by the Euro system makes us one of the central banks in the world where this work is being done. But of course, there are many choices, as Thomas and Andrea and Benoit said before, legally, technology, and also in terms of governance. So we are by far not at the end of the journey, but it is an important first step, which makes us confident that we can remain in this race. And a last word on what Benoit said, because I wanted to stress also the fact that what we are trying to do as well in the G20, for example, is to make sure that there is no fragmentation, that we can continue, even with new tools, to facilitate cross-border transfers and payments without encouraging the ones misusing the framework for criminal activities or whatever. And it is also important for the transmission of the monetary policy, of course.
If I may come back, a very important message from this project is also that we've worked hand in hand with private sector participants, including banks, but also technology providers, to be sure that what we do makes sense from a practical standpoint, that it really meets the needs of the industry and the market, and also to make sure that we are at the technological frontier, which I believe we are doing, particularly with this concept of a dual notary signature that is at the heart of the project.
Andrea, would you like to come in now?
Let me just underline one point that much has been said on this question, but the one thing is it works. Two central banks were able to maintain control over their wholesale CBDC and yet be on the same platform and exchange and have the wholesale CBDC, the value be exchanged. But the important part here is this is being done in what Benoit also said nicely, in a quasi-live environment. And this is really very important because this is where also the participants with whom we did this really got to test. It's not just a lab environment where you do it besides everything. You really have to look at what are the legal implications. What does it mean from a regulatory perspective? What does it mean for your IT system? How does it really work? What does it need to go to the next, to really go to the next stage? And the other thing that we did is we worked with resident financial institution as well as non-resident financial institution. Because if this kind of technology is going to ramp up, there's going to be the question, who gets access to these kind of platforms and how do central banks deal with that? So all of this to us is a clear success of the project Jura.
Thank you. And we have a question from Chris Spink from the International Financing Review. He says, does this experiment show that CBDCs could be used in central bank security purchase programs in theory? Benoit, would you like to take that first?
Well, the BIS is not purchasing securities for monetary policy purpose, so I'm sure my colleagues will be happy to answer.
Hey, Sylvia, Andrea.
Well, you know, many things are technically feasible. It does not mean that we are going to decide to use them politically. So it is too early to say. We explore, as Andrea said, and when Benoit stressed as well, the role of the private sector, etc. We will see at the end of the set of our experiments what we decide to do with it. Thank you.
Andrea?
We don't do any asset purchase program.
We have another question from John Revel of Reuters. He says, although you have said that this won't lead to the introduction of a wholesale CBDC, does this bring the rollout of a retail CBDC a little bit closer? So perhaps, Andrea, would you like to take that first?
To differentiate the two is this is clearly in the wholesale world, in the wholesale segment. And there are questions out there about what about the retail CBDC, the SNB. This is not something we're directly testing on, but we are participating. We're following that issue very closely. We're participating in working groups with other central banks. The position of the SNB on this particular issue has been clear. We do not see clear advantages at this point about issuing a retail CBDC. And let me be clear, that cannot be serviced by the current payment system, or at least a payment system that also is safe, resilient, fast, and interoperable. And so in our view, given there's the limited advantages that a good domestic payment system should not be able to offer, and on the other hand, a retail CBDC introduces a new set of risks, particularly how do you go about if every depositor can, with a click on his or her phone, transfer a lot of the bank deposits into a retail CBDC, that could really have far-reaching consequences for the stability of the financial system. That's just one idea. So those are issues that for us, we find that if you think about business case, for us, it's important to have a sound, resilient, modern payment system, but it does not necessarily require a retail CBDC. But we do find the importance to really understand the role of central bank money. If these kind of DLT-based infrastructure were to become really important, that is where we have really been focusing our experimental efforts.
Benoit?
Yeah, I mean, if one wants to ask oneself, where does this project lead? It's clearly not in the retail space. I mean, that project is about settling assets, so it's clearly in the wholesale space. It's very, very removed from the retail CBDC discussion. But it's really about making sure that the new universe developing around DLT solutions, developing on-chain, can have access to central bank money. And you've seen all the discussion about decentralized finance, DeFi, and the BIS has issued a bulletin a couple of days ago, which really makes very nicely the point about the importance of DeFi and the opportunities, but also the risks, and possibly financial stability risks coming with the development of decentralized finance, that is, financial services being provided on DLTs. And as Andrea said very, very rightly and importantly earlier, any systemic infrastructure, any large financial infrastructure has to be in a position to settle assets with central bank money, because central bank money is the safest of all possible settlement assets. It is very safe because the central bank cannot default. It is very liquid. It provides finality because settlements can happen as a transfer between two accounts in the book of the central bank, ultimately, or in our case, as central bank tokens. And it is neutral because the central bank has no commercial interest and will behave exactly the same with all market participants. But if you let DeFi develop without access to central bank liquidity, you will lose all these benefits. So this is really one step down a journey which ultimately could lead central banks to issue wholesale Cbdc to be used as settlement assets in decentralized finance, or more broadly, for all market infrastructures making use of DLT solutions. And that's a very important step forward. And it's good for the stability of the system.
Sylvie, anything to add from you?
Very briefly, because many things were said, and I fully agree with what Andrea said from the perspective of a central bank. Just one word maybe. For us, the question is not to interfere or to block technological change or to avoid some developments. It is to make sure that safety, financial stability, anti-money laundering rules, transmission of monetary policy will continue to be the beacon of what we are doing. And the reason why we want to do all these experiments, and then we will decide, is that we have to check which possibilities we can offer without reducing the level of safety or the level of financial stability, etc. So we are training ourselves to look at the new developments, not being against any technological change, but making sure that we can stick to our mission, which is to make sure that there is a public control on money. Because at the end, it is the trust in the system, and some private initiative could fail at a certain point or create troubles. And then, of course, the public would ask the public at large, the public authorities, how do you control this? So it's the same mission with new tools, to put it this way. The importance is the mission. It's not to block any tools. We will decide after all these experiments how far we go in wholesale and how far we go in retail.
Thank you. And a question for the SNB from Matt Allen of Swiss Info. He asks, why did the SNB not just support an SDX stablecoin? Wouldn't that have been a simpler option for final settlements?
Thank you. I'll pick up the beginning of this question. Absolutely. So as you know, SDX is a very important partner for us in this, because the project Jura, we're working also with the SDX, and we're also working with them in our parallel work, the project Helvetia. And you're absolutely right. So our focus here was to understand what is the role of wholesale Cbdc if you're going to have a DLT platform, and can it be used in a cross-border dimension? And this was really that was very specifically the objective of Project Jura. But if you look at another project, in particular Project Helvetia, that's another question we had, is across different types of ways to do transactions on the DLT platform. And in the first phase of Project Helvetia, we looked at the wholesale Cbdc versus a simple RTGS link, a simple interface system. So you don't actually have to put digital money onto the platform. You just have a messaging system between the DLT platform and the existing RTGS system. That's another way. And the third way is, of course, the stablecoin. And the stablecoin, in fact, is what SDX has used now when it is doing its actual transaction, because we're not issuing wholesale Cbdc. So the default for SDX currently is actually to use its own stablecoin. Thomas, do you want to add something on that?
Yeah, maybe. Thank you, Andrea. I could add that from a technical point of view, it would have been relatively similar using the SDX stablecoin versus the Cbdc, but there is a clear difference in the sense that the SDX stablecoin is a liability of a private issuer. And as Benoit said, for DLTs, if they are supposed to become important, it will be necessary for them to be able to settle with central bank money. And that was that project about. I think it's also important to point out that there are different models and different architectures how you can do wholesale settlement with central bank money. There are other experiments out there. Some were mentioned in the beginning. And this is a totally new approach, a new model how cross-border settlement could be done with wholesale CBDC. There are these technological innovations that have been mentioned, dual notary node, these subnetworks that are important. So this is you could say a benchmark. You could say this is the Jurassic mark of one model, and there are other models out there. And it's going to be interesting for central bankers to compare these different models and see what are the pros and cons.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Sandali Handagama from CoinDesk. She says, the report seems to suggest an intraday wholesale CBDC will have a positive impact on financial stability and limited influence on monetary policy. Was the scale of this experiment sufficient to assess these policy implications in detail? Sylvie, would you like to take that first?
Well, no, we cannot pretend that what we did with 200,000 euros and a certain type of settlement can be extrapolated for everything, but it is a first step. And of course, when we will enter into the phase where we evaluate the consequences for monetary policy, we have to envisage larger scale. But step by step, chaque chose en son temps, as we say in French.
Andrea, anything to add from the SNB side?
No, that's good. Good answer.
We have a follow-up. Actually, just before we have one more question in the chat, but just a reminder that the contents of this media briefing are on the record but embargoed until 5 p.m. Central European time. If you wish to ask a question, you can also raise your hand in WebEx or send us an email at press@bis.org. In the meantime, we'll go to a follow-up question from Alain Guimol, who asks, can you explain a little more the interest of this type of cross-border transfer of asset? Does it make the transfer less expensive for central banks? And how is it possible? Morten, would you like to take that one first?
Thank you. A very good question. I think it's important to realize that Jura is not about really the cost for central banks, but rather about the safety and efficiency of settlement for financial institutions, participating in, as we mentioned already, the foreign exchange markets and also in wider international capital markets. So it's really not about the cost for central banks.
Thank you. Anything to add from the Banque de France or the SNB side?
No,
Can I just underline, because Morten, the point from the role of central bank, the question is really first to start with also what Sylvie said, innovation comes from the private sector. If DLT platforms are going to emerge, improve performing, effective, efficient, safe, and so they start to gain a certain scale, then the question comes, how do you put money on those platforms, or do you even put money? As I mentioned, we did an exercise where we didn't even put money on the platform, but we allowed a transfer. So the question is, once they become important, how do you put money, and what is the role of central bank money into that environment? I mean, that's really important, that for us it's to be ready in case this technology takes off and turns out to be systemic. How should central banks be ready to ensure the safety and resilience and stability of the system going forward?
Great, thank you. So if there are no further questions, we'll wrap up the media conference now. Just a reminder that the embargo lifts at 5 p.m. Central European time today. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to reading your articles. And perhaps if I could just mention another event that we have coming up on Friday, the 10th of December at 10 a.m. Basel time. Our General Manager, Augustin Carstens, will virtually join the presidents of the ECB, the Bundesbank and the Banque de France in an event that sets the stage for the upcoming BIS Innovation Hub Eurosystem Centre, which Benoit mentioned earlier. So we broadcast live, and you can contact us at the BIS media team for details. Thank you, everyone.